Our next session is a very interesting and thought-provoking one on leadership for the future. And for that, I would like to welcome the moderator of the session, Venkat Ishwara, President Development, Ashoka University. Venkat has been associated with Ashoka University project since 2013. While his principal role is fundraising globally for Ashoka, he has essayed multiple roles at the university. Welcome, Venkat.
Thank you, Priyanka. This has been quite a thrilling couple of hours, and it gives me great joy to welcome one of the big daddies and doyen in the world of people management and HR, Dr. Santrupt Mishra. Santrupt needs no introduction, but let's begin by having him on the screen. Santrupt, welcome to Ashoka University.
Thank you so much, Venkat. Very happy to be with you all.
And thanks for sparing time. I'd like to quickly begin with a short introduction to you. Santrupt, your credentials are quite outstanding, and I think our audience needs to kind of just go through that for a minute. If you give me a few seconds, I'd like to introduce Santrupt. He's currently the CEO and of Birla Carbon and Director Group Human Resources of the Aditya Birla Group. An HR professional and business leader for over 30 years, Santrupt has worked at the board level for nearly close to 2 decades and in publicly listed companies and unlisted companies and in non-profit organizations, both in India and outside. He's director in several companies of the Aditya Birla Group, including Aditya Birla Capital, and recently appointed in Grasim Industries and other professional bodies. Santrupt is also present on other professional bodies such as the Association of Executive Search Consultants of the US. He was also on the board of Xavier's Institute of Management in Bhubaneswar. He served as a board member of SHR and Certification Commission USA for a 3-year term. Santrupt holds 2 postgraduate degrees in political science and in personal management and industrial relations. He holds 2 PhDs from India and UK. He's a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources and also an Eisenhower Fellow from the US. He's been awarded several professional recognitions for his contribution to business and human resources in the past few decades. Santrupt, that's extremely creditable. And we'd like to begin with your views on where we are currently.
Thank you so much, Venkat, for that introduction. It does add performance pressure to me, but I must say that I'm honored and delighted to be invited. I had some trepidation because of the awesome reputation of Ashoka University and people associated with it, that whether I should be coming in. But I accepted the invitation out of respect for academic institutions in general, and Ashoka University in particular. Some of my colleagues, their children are your students, and I get great feedback. But most importantly, I came here to meet the brave and courageous audience who still have enthusiasm for virtual conferences and webinars, that too on a Saturday and just before lunch. So I think if your 600 odd participants dwindle to 100 in next few minutes, I would understand why that is so, but it's great to be here. Now, the subject I'm supposed to speak about is leadership for the future. I think it's a combination of 2 very evergreen subjects, leadership and future. I think these have been always subjects of great interest, speculation, research, theory, pontification. And the evergreen character of these 2 subjects are is the beauty of it. Every age, every society, whether you talk about the human rights movements, civil rights movements, Indian independence, Vietnam crisis, world wars, I think the issue of leadership and future have always engaged human attention for generations, if I may say. More so at this point in time, as world grapples with several issues, I think the world is crying out for leadership to solve human problems today. And at the same time, people look upon leaders with great hope that they will lead us into the future. And I'm reminded of John Quincy Adams' famous statement where he said, if your actions inspire, and I quote, if your actions inspire others to learn more, to dream more, to do more, and become more, you are a leader. And I think, therefore, that sentence in many ways captures the spirit of leadership. It is about call to action, and not by oneself, but through other people, and about inspiring generations, young and old alike, to be able to become what is the best that they can become, the way they can become, and wherever they are, perhaps whether they can practice leadership to be able to contribute. Future, again, is a very interesting subject, as some of us believe that future is not, or future is no longer as it used to be. Perhaps nowadays future arrives too quickly in unimaginable ways with huge challenges and great opportunities. I'm reminded of Nesbitt's book of perhaps 1984, used to be called Mega Trends, the title of the book. And he wrote something to this effect, and which still resonates in my mind. And I don't remember the exact words, but I think something very close he said. And I think I quote him saying, future has this unusual habit of suddenly and dramatically becoming the present. So all that we read in scientific novels, or the flying cars, autonomous cars, intergalactic movement, space travel, a lot of those imaginary, fantastic kind of Harry Potter kind of situations suddenly seem to become real for all of us, and the COVID-19 pandemic is no different. So therefore, when we find that future is so dramatically changing and becoming so rapidly here and now and today, I believe that leadership of any one kind seems to be inadequate. And I think one of the mistakes of the past sometimes, though obviously there have been many different theories of leadership, including situational, I think sometimes in common understanding, we seem to embrace and think about leadership of being of one kind. And I think the first point I would like all of us to think about, that there obviously is a need for a bouquet of leadership of different kinds, rather than to think of leadership as of one kind. Future of leadership, when you talk about the idea of future of leadership, and if you like a good wine, you mull over this whole idea of future of leadership, the whole idea sounds a little bit deterministic, as if one kind of leadership is inevitably going to happen or play out, or will be necessary, or one kind of leadership is going to be effective in the future. But if we look at today's big business, microfinance, issues of child labor, climate change, human rights, medical ethics, data privacy, all of these issues need different kinds of leadership. Of course, all of these may have some common threads, but it is not one homogeneous kind of leadership. Even within business, for example, or even within a conglomerate, like the Aditya Birla Group, where I have been very proud to work for the last 25 years, we need not only different kinds of leadership at different stages of different businesses, but we need different kind of leadership even at the same time. So therefore, I think one of our approaches to leadership for the future has to be an experimental approach to leadership, to experiment with our own personal leadership, to experiment with institutional leadership, what may work, what seems to work, as if we are doing lab tests or prototyping, rather than looking at leadership as a definitive, concrete, specific answer to all kinds of problems of the future. Future too is likely to be as much an unpredictable, automatic revelation as it is going to be an act of human creation. So therefore, future, again, often we talk about in a deterministic sense, as if future is a future state or a destination that we arrive into. But of course, there are two kinds of notions of future we can think about. One, that it will be truly a destination that we can imagine and create with human creativity and ingenuity, as much as future will be where we land up eventually, irrespective of what we imagine or dream of, the same way perhaps Christopher Columbus landed up somewhere centuries ago where he supposedly were going to a different destination. Therefore, leadership will always be a creative act of purposeful endeavor to create something very specific, desirable, imaginative, dreamlike, or important. As much leadership will be about adapting, navigating, understanding, and exploring wherever we land up and making sure that we survive in that environment, we hold things together, we move human society forward. So this twin views of the future as a future definable state that we can create with human ingenuity, or a state where we may land up eventually and we having to cope with and survive with it. I think this kind of twin view of future will make leadership so much more exciting and complex and challenging. And therefore, we need to think about how do we play out that leadership. One thing for sure in the future of leadership, the entitled leadership that we have experienced from time to time, the entitlement flowing from either a family or a legacy or a pedigree education, wealth, I think all of those kind of entitled leadership are likely to give way to the principles of legitimacy in the future. And I honestly, personally believe that the legitimacy of leadership in future is likely to come from two sources. First, acceptance of one's leadership by the stakeholders. And second, the experience of the stakeholders with the leadership in terms of what is delivered. So let me talk about a little bit about the acceptance of leadership by the stakeholders. I think in future, one will first allow a leader or leadership to even have a foothold only if the stakeholders are convinced about the leadership's authenticity, values, the sense of purpose, the transparency that the leadership brings, and these attributes being visible in leadership will gain acceptance or bring acceptance from the stakeholders, and that will be the first part of leadership. And the second part is going to be the way the leadership plays out and actually delivers issues on the ground through ideation, through inclusion, through co-creation, through the speed of response to crisis of the kind we see. So it is delivery, delivery, and delivery that is going to build confidence once stakeholders have accepted a leadership. So therefore, one of the things that leadership of the future has to be acutely conscious about is this voluntary acceptance by stakeholders based on your personal qualities of authenticity, values, sense of purpose, as I mentioned, and also the repeat performance of delivering, meeting stakeholder expectations. Of course, the two are not necessarily going to be independent of each other. They'll be reinforcing each other, feeding on each other, strengthening each other by virtuous cycle of good quality acceptance and good quality delivery, building a stronger legitimacy. One of the dilemmas of leadership discussion through generations and theories and ideas and concepts, and I think perhaps leadership is one subject on which you got millions of articles and books you will find anyway. I think one of the things while discussing future of leadership we need to carry in mind is that leadership behavior or traits that were historically known to be relevant will not necessarily be outdated, irrelevant, or inconsequential just because we are talking about leadership for the future. So for example, some aspects of leadership that we have conventionally understood, be it passion, be it energy, be it courage, some of these will remain evergreen ingredients of leadership. However, those by themselves may not prove to be enough, adequate, or may not be fully relevant. Some of the attributes of leadership in the past could also lose significance, maybe less relevant. For example, demagogy, for example, or charisma of someone's personality or pedigree, for example. People often refer to a lineage to talk about, well, he comes from this family, so must be a natural leader. I think some of that would crumble under the pressure of the search for legitimacy of leadership. But what is important to realize is that while some attributes, behavior of leadership will remain evergreen and constant, some may lose in significance, the important part is to think about what would be the future challenges of leadership. And in that context, what kind of leadership attributes, competencies, there are different words again to describe all of that. I'm not going into the semantic, superfine distinction between those. But what we need to think about is, in the context of the critical and key challenges that leadership will face in the future. And when I talk about leadership, it is not simply about business leadership. Leadership to me is all forms of institutional leadership, whether business, academia, not-for-profit organizations, voluntary organizations, military organizations, religious establishments. I think all of them. None of the institutions of the future can escape some of the challenges that generally are going to be in front of leadership. So the challenges are likely to be, for example, productivity, how to get more out of the resources that the institution has, and how to therefore deliver greater value out of scarce or limited resources. I think that productivity challenge is going to confront leaders in all fields. Similarly, rapid and intense and frequent changes and disruption, some deliberate and some thrust from outside world, is going to be something that every institution is likely to face, and more and more. And in that context, we have to think about leadership behavior and traits. The third one obviously would be the need for innovation. As human needs change, human needs grow. For example, digital prayers at this point in time, digital puja, for example, is an innovation that has become necessary because of the kind of situation we are confronted with. I think the challenge of innovation is going to be in front of all leaders in all institutions, as is going to be the fourth one, which I would describe as public scrutiny. I think the part of legitimacy that I talked about and the need to earn repeated legitimacy would be processed through this whole process we call as public scrutiny. All stakeholders would have their own ways of scrutinizing, whether suppliers or your clients, the government, the regulator, the media, the interest groups, the lobbies. All stakeholders would have their own process of taking institutions and leadership through public scrutiny. And this intense public scrutiny is the process through which the gold of legitimacy or the stamp of legitimacy will get refined and will earn superior or further legitimacy. And the last part of future leadership challenge is going to be managing contradictions and polarities. And we see every day of that. How do we manage diplomatic relations, economic relationship with China, at the same time protect territorial integrity, be it at Galwan or be it at Doklam or wherever that is? How do you use nuclear deterrence, but at the same time sign treaties with countries to say no first nuclear attack? How do you be, as a leader, be strong and purposeful, but at the same time come across as earthy, human, with humility, and with a real connect with the clients and the society and the constituents that you deal with? So I think the future of leadership will be this entire ability to continuously struggle with polarities. Right now at COVID-19, the biggest challenge before the government is, how do you reconcile public health and safety with livelihood and easing of lockdown? It's a continuous process of balancing and managing those contradictions. And the contradictions are going to only grow because the expectations of stakeholders would be so many more, the scrutiny will be intense, the principles and the challenges to resources will be heavy, and therefore the contradictions are likely to grow. So in that context, I would quickly list out about 6 to 7 leadership attributes or challenges that either leaders need to bring on the table or be comfortable about to kind of make their leadership effective. The first one, I would say, the leader's own comfort with rapid, what I would call as social deconstruction and reconstruction, irrespective of the socio-cultural milieu that the leader comes from. Now, if you look around the world, our society, India included, US, there is a continuous process of social deconstruction and reconstruction is going on. And it is being driven by education, awareness, aspiration. It is being driven by access to resources, connectivity for collective awareness and brainstorming and collective actioning. I think the social formations, the way the newer ones being created and the older ones are kind of collapsing, I think the ability to be comfortable in this continuous process of social construction, deconstruction around yourself is going to be an important psychological feature, mental makeup of the leaders of the future. The second is going to be inclusiveness. And the inclusiveness is not going to be one of symbolic inclusiveness. It will be an intense requirement of substantive inclusiveness, which starts with the mindset and temperament of being open to alternative ideas, maybe what you can consider to be preposterous ideas, never tried ideas, to many other forms of inclusiveness, diversity, critical and substantial participation, acceptance of alternate forms of authority, empowerment, and inclusiveness will come in many forms. And I think the leadership of the future need to understand the multiple facets of that inclusiveness. My third one for leadership for the future would be the ability to take a holistic view end to end, a systems view, and not just a narrow functional sliver or a technical sliver or profitability sliver or any particular sliver. I think a holistic kind of balanced agenda and thinking about the consequences, the repercussion, and the feedback that comes back and course correction. I think being comfortable with that whole systemic view of what leaders are doing, their organizations are doing, that capability, that perspective would be very important. The fourth one, of course, is a no-brainer. All of you would understand that greatly. The leaders of the future, whichever sector they are leaders in, they need to have tremendous comfort with technology. The willingness to embrace technology, adopt technology, perhaps take unusual interest in technology, spend time about technology will be important. The fifth one to me would be to have more of what I call as LAD, L-A-D, to lead. And the LAD for me is learning and adaptability. I think leaders of the future, if are unwilling to learn quickly and adapt themselves, would perhaps lose relevance. And in that process, their organizations will also lose relevance. The sixth one is likely to be social consciousness, that every institution in some ways is a social asset, is a social construct. And its primary objective may be one, but its secondary delivery must be something socially good. And that again adds to the legitimacy. Therefore, ignoring social consciousness about the way you do business, the way you deliver service, the way you kind of connect with your stakeholders, I think that social consciousness is going to be a very important attribute of leadership's thought process. And lastly, and most importantly, at a very personal note, I believe the leaders of the future would require tremendous amount of personal energy and emotional equanimity. People call it spiritual quotient, EQ, and all of that. But I think emotional equanimity is going to be a source of people to be socially conscious, to take a systemic view, to be able to adapt. So I believe that at the core of leadership needs to be a kind of very personal sense of emotional equanimity, where you kind of don't get troubled by whatever happens around you. So in last few minutes, I know that I'm supposed to leave about 15 minutes for question answer. I'm about 12 minutes past one in the next 2-3 minutes. The one of the questions therefore is that leading institutions, small institutions, any forms of institutions, private, public, business organizations, how do we build leadership for the future? I believe that two things are becoming important for building leadership for the future. And perhaps the way we have run executive education in the past, the way we have trained leaders, or what we have done in classrooms, in schools and colleges, perhaps will be utterly inadequate if we do not focus on these two. The two are, one is giving future leaders multiple experiences of doing different things, working through resource scarcity, working through crisis, coordinating with large number of people and agencies without any influence or authority, excuse me, working through unsupportive environment or a hostile environment, dealing through mega crisis, small crisis. I think a lot of experience of doing things is important. But obviously in human life, everything we cannot do firsthand ourselves. Therefore, the second lot can be exposure to things that we cannot participate in, but we can observe, for example, alternate styles of working, alternate operating models, different perspectives, different thought processes. For example, how micro enterprise works. Exposure is not same as experience. Experience is being a participant, a player, an active individual there. And exposure is about knowing and seeing and analyzing and reflecting by being exposed to data and behavior. And therefore, a combination of experience and exposure could prepare leaders for the future much better than the way we have done it or attempted to do it through classrooms within our own organizations. In our own experience within the Aditya Birla Group, we have created many opportunities for our young management trainees, who we call as lead and lead, through mechanisms like participating in Teach for India, or going very early on and overseas into backup beyond units, mock drills in crisis. For example, even some senior leaders, completely unaided, we send them to countries like Nigeria or Mongolia to figure out how to remain secure in those countries and yet explore business opportunity for the Aditya Birla Group. So this is a first-hand experience, for example, of not supported by anything. You plan, you do, you go and immerse yourself in that environment, experience it, make things happen and come back. Similarly, participating in professional bodies, trade bodies, advisory committees of academic institutions, where your rank, your position, your title, your box doesn't matter, because all of these are going to be irrelevant in the future. So the last thing I want to say is that what is leadership need not be uniform, right from school to the big corporate business, excepting to say that it is the desire to do good, to make a difference, to make an impact, that we need to instill entirely through our entire life cycle, from school education, through small projects and activities, collaborative activities, influence, etc., through the universities, into the workplace. I think unless we try to instill a different mindset around leadership, small skills and large skills, right through people's career, and of course, there will always be new challenges. Even the most evolved professionals need to learn and evolve into newer leadership. So that's my message to all of us. And thank you again for having me there. And Venkat, if there are any questions, I will try my best to answer.
Thank you, Santrupt. That was engaging. There are a bunch of questions. I'll just put you on the spot a little bit and say, what are two things you would prescribe to leaders in the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, 5 years is a bit far away, but the next 2 to 3 years, what would you say would be two attributes leaders and emerging leaders should possess and display in organizations?
Well, I think one certainly would be that surround themselves with smart people who are not like them. because that is going to bring more color and flavor to way they perceive the world and they do it. And second, obviously, to learn to be more humble, to believe that they and they alone cannot make a difference to the world. The world was built by a lot of people's collaborative effort, and therefore, instead of relying entirely on their own charisma, their wisdom, their experience, their education, all of that, need to kind of seek out good ideas and learn that humility to accept that some other ideas could be better than your own is going to be an important part of every leader.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Questions are coming up. Any thoughts? I'm just going sequentially. Any thoughts on how labor laws and work permits would?
Sorry, you're breaking off, Venkat, so I'm trying to guess what you're saying. Are you reading from Q&A or? Hello?
Yes, I'm reading from the Q&A. Any thoughts on how labor laws and work permits need to evolve to meet the challenges of the future?
Well, I think labor laws were a response to a certain kind of social construct, which was more exploitative, and there was information asymmetry. And obviously today, there is a lot more information available. People are more aware, and therefore, the labor laws need to keep pace with that changing reality, how to empower the modern workforce to be able to secure its own rights. Different countries and different societies will move at different pace in this regard. India perhaps is a transitional society. We may need some labor laws certainly to make sure that newer generation, industrial, productive, organized activity is not exploitative. But at the same time, if we remain stuck with the kind of labor legislation historically we have had, I think we would be limiting our progress. As a transitional society, we need to make a fine balance, keeping in mind the new situation of the new organized labor or even individual labor, because individual capacity people are also in certain segments able to negotiate a lot more than collectives could. But I think the first step, I think government has started taking. There are a lot of proposals that have gone from trade bodies and associations to merge the hundreds of labor legislations into more manageable numbers, identify archaic provisions and get rid of them, contemporize some provisions. For example, some parts we amended that women could not work in the night in certain operations. Now, that was perhaps relevant at a certain point in time, but we have started changing that. Similarly, I think there would be need for a lot more changes in specific areas of labor legislation, which I think both government and unions and employers need to continue to have a dialogue to identify those. It will not always be easy to bring all parties together. ILO has made a great attempt, limited success, but I think the power equations of societies have changed significantly today to make a fresh attempt at bringing all parties together.
Right. Okay. So this, the next question directs you towards thinking about the Birla Group. The question is, what have been the multiple styles of leadership at the Birla Group, and how have the responses evolved and changed over the years, and how have you affected change and still managed growth?
Well, I've been, as I said, 25 years here. We have grown from $1.6 billion to $48 billion. Obviously, somewhere the leadership change, adaptiveness has played a great role. And that leadership adaptiveness and change has started from my chairman, Kumar Mangalam Birla, to the board of directors, the internal board members, the functional leaders at all levels. So I think the changes that have, I always describe that the world will always have the developed part and the developing part and the underdeveloped part. And I think to treat anything as uniform would not be right. Even in Aditya Birla Group, from time to time, you would find that there would be the very advanced pockets within there, the transitioning pockets, and some are much slower to change, perhaps, because the nature of industry is like that. Sometimes, for example, the mining or a textile industry, they perhaps change much slower, whereas the the ready-made garments industry that you call as fashion industry or financial services, they seem to be changing much faster. So therefore, I think what we have benefited from continuous investment into learning, training, upgrading capability, as I said, about experience, exposure, kind of selective recruitment of leaders from different kinds of organizations, global, Indian, public sector, who have brought alternative mindsets and thought processes into Aditya Birla Group. Therefore, today, the idea that I talked about leadership not being deterministic, but a bouquet of leadership, I think we benefit from that bouquet of leadership where people are able to see visibly different models of leadership at work within the Aditya Birla Group.
Great, thank you. Another question is, given the situation that we are in, it requires for a certain bit of rapid action. So will shoot and then aim become more evident? Is there a bias for action or inaction, and therefore there might be some big failures? Is that a risk we are running?
Well, I think, there would be occasions where you need to shoot, and as you shoot, you keep on learning and adapting. And I think the medical fraternity in the world and in India has done a tremendous job from that point in saving lives on COVID-19. My own daughter is a doctor in England, and I keep talking with her about what's happening. And obviously, this was an unknown virus, and therefore the treatment protocol was unknown. So I think doctors have done tremendously, because you cannot wait for everything to be understood to save a life. So you keep on kind of applying solutions, applying therapy, and learn and observe and keep on modifying. And that's something brilliantly the medical fraternity has done, which gives great assurance today to us in India that in the last 3-4 months, our doctors have coped and read more about it, experienced and done that. I believe that this kind of rapid development, when happens when something is unknown, in those conditions, perhaps we'll have to learn to shoot first and kind of keep our ears to the ground and learn and keep on adapting. That's how it should happen.
Thank you. Another question, this is specific. What should we be learning to continue to hone our leadership skills? So the question is on what?
What should we be learning? I think many things, depending on what your personal state of development today is. Because again, I'm saying that the same bouquet of learning cannot apply to everything. If you look at a digital immigrant like me, I need to be learning more about technology today. I wouldn't be able to get into a Zoom call or an MS call, maybe 3 months ago, 4 months ago. Today, I'm pretty adept. I can, solve my problem and technical troubleshoot and get it. So I think a digital immigrant needs to be more digital savvy. Those who are perhaps newer, do not have great amount of human skill in terms of interpersonal ability, they need to learn something different. So I believe it cannot be, I gave you 5, 6, 7 prescriptions of the kind that every leader could learn for the future. But I think the important thing one got to remember that we are all on a personal trajectory of evolution and development. And we need to continuously make this assessment to say, where am I in my own journey? What's the context that I'm experiencing? And therefore, what is likely to be most relevant for us? Because I wish there was a kind of multivitamin tablet equivalent of leadership development. There is none. And therefore, it has to be a bit sequential and experimental. So I am sorry that I'm not able to be very prescriptive, saying all of you go tomorrow morning and learn these 3 things.
No, sure. So that's actually a great answer. Another one, how can trust be built while engaging with employees online? So this is a good question. I mean, I meet you, I get to know you, I see your body language, and I know Santrupt. But tomorrow, I just meet Santrupt on Zoom. I don't know you so well. How do I build trust?
I think trust begets trust. So if you want to build trust, you must first learn to trust and give trust. Right. If it is a transaction where you are waiting always for signs of trust to come from the other party, for you to be able to trust, I think we may not ever be able to build that, particularly in a virtual environment. I think we need to be self-assured enough to say that every individual I hire, recruit, they would like to do the best job that is possible. And I would like to trust you and your authenticity and your integrity until you give me reasons to question that. So therefore, I would start with the point of trust rather than waiting for seeing signals whether I can trust the individual. Because a virtual environment, the data points initially would be too limited for you to believe that. And sometimes you may not have a choice but to start with trust. Because the moment you hired, you decided to put in trust. Then having hired now not to trust doesn't make any sense, however you hired the individual. So I would suggest that we begin with trust ourselves.
Thank you. We have another 2 minutes to go, Santrupt. Another question for you. These are from senior folks. For those who are above 45 years of age, what advice do you have for them in terms of learning new skills to succeed in a changed environment?
Well, one advice I would give is, which I give to myself, being on the other side, wrong side of 45 certainly, is that increase or intensify your engagement with younger people. Learn to understand their language, their sentiment, their temperament, and maybe elevate them to be the role of your coach, your mentor, your teacher, whatever you call it. Because that's when you learn the new skills, because that is the generation that is coming with that. And one of the problem is, being older, you don't have to be inauthentic enough to say that I feel shy about learning this. You got to kind of shed that sense of guilt or shame or fear to say, yes, it didn't exist at my time. I didn't learn. I do mental maths faster than my children because, I grew up doing mental maths and not calculator. So, that is my strength. But I shouldn't hesitate to learn a spreadsheet or, whatever it is that comes up in the future.
Right. The last question coming your way, and then we are kind of done with this, this is again for younger people. What are today's graduates equipped to demonstrate these qualities that you mentioned? So basically, what are the attributes you want young graduates to possess to develop leadership skills?
Well, I think one is that not doing things just because you have got a job and you have paid salary. Bring some commitment, a piece of you to work. It is about your professional pride. It is about fulfilling yourself. It is not about doing a job. So I think that sense of commitment and that sense of professional pride, that I want to make a difference, explore with myself, create an impact, and I want to do something. I think that is something most important that every young person could bring, because that is purely within their control. Many other things may not be in their control. Quality of teaching could have been bad. The access to infrastructure could have been poor. But what you bring in terms of your initiative, your commitment, your value system, that is purely personal to you. You own it. And I think not bringing that, perhaps you are reducing your own firepower at work and reducing your potential to grow and flourish.
Santrupt, thank you so much. It's been very enlightening. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
I hope people have learned from your conversations. And we would love to have you back soon sometime.
Certainly look forward to visiting your campus sometime. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for those marvelous ideas on leadership for the future. As you mentioned, the current crisis has highlighted that leadership of any one kind may be inadequate. We need accountable, innovative, inclusive, adaptable, and resilient leaders who can thrive in a paradoxical situation. And very importantly, there is a need among leaders for increased social consciousness, spiritual equanimity, as you mentioned, and the need to be able to trust. We must all experiment with our ideas of leadership at a personal and organizational level to truly surmount the unpredictability of the future and overcome key challenges faced by leadership, including how to get increased productivity, manage the ever-changing human needs, public scrutiny, and managing contradictions. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, once again for a wonderful session. Thank you, Venkat, for moderating it so beautifully.